fall, I talked to some people in Big Cedar Lake, which is that kind of upper circle that's on it. That's close to Stony Lake. I think it's just north. They reported Starry stonewort as being present at one of the boat launches. That's of a concern because because Cedar Lake is not attached to the Trent-Severn Waterway, so it was evidence of overland transport from somebody probably had their boat in the Trent-Severn Waterway, took it across the Big Cedar Lake, and when they put it in, the boat wasn't checked for invasive species, and it got in the lake. So they're dealing with that now. The lower circle is 2 stormwater management ponds in Aurora and Newmarket. We're doing a study on the environmental conditions on those, and I kind of took a few plant samples in to evaluate and kind of to investigate what was going on there. And we even found Starry stonewort at these 2 stormwater management ponds. Probably 99% of the transport of Starry stonewort is from boats and trailers and so on. Stormwater ponds are not used for boating, and there's no recreational fishing that goes on in them. And this is evidence that some people have a theory that Starry stonewort can get entangled, or little fragments of it can get entangled in the feathers of waterfowl. There are lots of ducks and geese that use these stormwater ponds, so it's probably flying between Lake Ontario, Lake Simcoe, and Georgia Bay. It got tangled up in their feathers, and that's probably how it wound up in the stormwater management pond. So what are the consequences of this, and what can we do from a management side? On the recreation side of things, people that like to use the water, we're seeing reports of increased wash-ups of the plant material. So these pictures just show Starry stonewort washing up on the shoreline of 2 areas of Lake Simcoe. Receiving increased public complaints to municipalities here at the Conservation Authority, and also government agencies as well. And anybody that bases their livelihood on the shallow water part of the lake, marinas, beaches, shorelines, and so on, are starting to see economic impacts where they have to deal with removing these wash-ups and also dealing with the plants that are in the water and impede swimming and boating areas. There's also an ecological consequence of this as well. If you look at kind of an underwater plant community, it almost looks like an underwater forest. The plants have kind of thin stalks, and then they got kind of a bushy top on them. They look like underwater trees. There's lots of nooks and crannies for fish to hide out. The bait fish like to hide out there. And also predators such as pike and muskellunge and bass and so on. They have kind of an ambush strategy where they kind of jump out of the plants and kind of ambush whatever prey happens to be going by. So the top picture is kind of a conceptual diagram, and even with invasive Eurasian water milfoil in it, the plant community had this forest-like structure, and then the bottom just kind of shows that live picture of it. With Starry stonewort, you get a kind of a dismantling of the structure. You get these massive pillows or these massive amounts of Starry stonewort that are intertangled. Fish can't really get inside them. So it forms almost like a wall in shallow water, and you're starting to push these fish offshore. So you're pushing the tiny fish out to where they're more susceptible to predators. You're losing nursery habitat and so on. And also the ambush predators like the pike and the muskellunge and so on. They have to have a chase strategy. So they're losing a lot of energy, and you're going to wind up with probably a fish that takes a lot more effort to receive its food than it would if it could hide out in the plant community. So there's also an ecological consequence to this Starry stonewort situation. How do we manage Starry stonewort? That is the big question, and it's not just here in Ontario. It's from in the United States, from Vermont, right around the Great Lakes, right in through to Minnesota and Wisconsin. We're all trying to deal with this. There is a group called the Starry Stonewort Collaborative that I've kind of tapped onto to kind of exchange information, and we're trying to find out the proper ways to manage Starry stonewort. Herbicides have limited effectiveness. In Ontario, diquat is the only one that's permitted to be used, and that is 100% not effective against Starry stonewort. In fact, it makes the situation worse because it kills off all the competing species that may be keeping Starry stonewort in check. It gives Starry stonewort access to more habitat and also unlimited resources in terms of nutrients, and because of that, it just explodes in growth and takes over an entire area. On the American side, they can be a lot more hands-on with what they do for management. There has been some use in some of the lakes in Minnesota and Michigan where they're using copper. Copper has been effective against algae. The problem with copper on Starry stonewort, this is one of these masses that you see that I pulled off and kind of stuck on a dock here as well. Copper only kills where it lands, so for that reason it only kills on the top of these Starry stonewort masses. It doesn't travel through the rest of the macroalgae body. Macroalgae don't have a vascular system like plants and trees do, so for that reason it doesn't get transported to the rest of the Starry stonewort plant. So it only kills off the top, and then the bottom regrows, and it grows over this dead area on the top. And in terms of using it in Ontario, I'd be very hesitant because copper can cause health problems, and especially if you're using your lake as a source of drinking water or as a source of potable water for cooking vegetables and cooking with and so on, or showering, there's going to be some health effects that happen with that when you're spraying these massive doses of copper into the water. We've also looked at manual removal as well. The picture just shows one of these plant harvesters that kind of go out and float along and collect plants from a water body. Again, in Ontario, you're not allowed to rip plants out by the root. So this is pretty much the same as mowing your lawn. You're kind of chopping the tops off the plants, and then you're collecting them, and then you have to go back, and it has to be repeated. So manual removal is partly effective, but it's very labor intensive. You pretty much need a harvester on the lake that's constantly going around just mowing the aquatic plants. Hand pulling is more effective, where you have somebody with a snorkel or a scuba gear where they can go down and they can target these areas with invasive plants in it and remove that. But again, you need a permit for that. And also aquatic plants tend to spread by fragmentation as well. So unless you collect every single little piece of starry stonewort or Eurasian milfoil or whatever your plant is, you're just going to spread it to a different area, and you're going to wind up with a situation that's a lot worse. It's best at early stages of the infestation. So if you first find it by a boat launch, you can get at it early and you can get at it hard, and then keep an eye on it in a very small localized site. You probably have a chance. But for a lake-wide site, something the size of, say, Lake Simcoe or even Stony Lake, if it's spread for a wide area, it's really kind of out of your hands at that point. And also those star-shaped structures, those bulbils, what they're called, they just kind of reanimate again in the spring. So unless you collect all of those as well, you're going to wind up with patches of starry stonewort that are going to be coming back. And this is just a picture that I took from a journal article that was published that shows kind of the starry stonewort hatching out, if you will, of one of these little star-shaped bulbils kind of thing. So wherever they land, when environmental conditions are right, they kind of pop out and you get a whole new starry stonewort plant and a whole new colony that's going to start wherever they are. What we're doing on Lake Simcoe is mainly communication and education. We're trying to educate people what starry stonewort it is and how to keep from spreading it to place. So check your boats before you launch, also after you pull it out as well. Dump starry stonewort on land. Don't throw it back in the lake when it's done. And when you're moving from place to place, if you find it tangled up your propellers and so on, if you move through an area, stop, lift your motor out, and then take that plant back to shore. Don't just throw it into a new area. So a lot of the spread in Lake Simcoe was probably through boaters, and there were a lot of boaters that went from place to place, and they just spread it when they took it off their boat props and kind of dumped it into an area. Boat launch inspections are an effective way. I know they do this in the United States a lot. They're limited or not done in Ontario. It's mainly a cost and a manpower thing. I know on Lake Simcoe, all of our boat launches are mostly self-serve. You kind of show up, you launch your boat yourself, and then you buy your parking pass for the day, and there's really no staff there to help educate you or check your boat over to see if there's invasive species on it. And also any of these things, such as boat launch inspections, are not really effective after the fact. They're kind of trying to contain the spread within the lake. So we're slowly making progress with messaging, and talking to groups like you and so on are another way which we're trying to do this. So I think that's all I have. So I'd be happy to take any questions if there's any typed in, or Ed, if you want to wait till the end, I can stick around and I'll answer the questions then as well.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, so I do have two questions here coming in from Reed Brownscombe about dealing with starry stonewort. First, is any experience with heavy seeding of wild rice to impede starry stonewort after manual removal?
I haven't heard it. They have been planting wild rice in Lake Simcoe in a few areas. It's also not an area where starry stonewort has been found before, kind of thing. So we are keeping an eye on it. So we're trying to see if wild rice actually impedes it out, or if starry stonewort can compete that. So we are looking at that, and we're studying the process of it. But again, it's a very slow process.
Is there, and on a related sort of question, I'll just interject with my own, but have you found in areas where there's good beds of pond lily that they're effective at shading out starry stonewort?
They could. With our plant studies, we're mainly offshore, so we're at a water depth of 1 meter, so we're kind of limited in how shallow the boat can get into. So we're not really in those kind of quiet areas where pond lilies are. But I'd be interested to see if anybody knows any information on that.
Sure. Okay. The second question was, any experience using very hot water to kill starry stonewort pillows rather than hand pulling? I've read of complete collapses occasionally when the water temperature exceeds 30 degrees Celsius.
Interesting. No, I haven't heard about that. Lake Simcoe, actually, this year we've recorded some of the highest water temperatures we've had, but it's only been up to 27 degrees Celsius. So I haven't heard if there is if how effective hot water is on that. That'd be interesting to know. But also, I'd be cautious about what adding warm water would do to the other things that you're trying to keep alive on there. When I talked to the people at the Presqu'île and Trenton yacht clubs, they had said that they had noticed that the one year that they didn't have to kind of excavate the Starry stonewort out of there was a year when the water temperatures were relatively cool. So I think it's probably temperature dependent, but I don't know what the thermal maximum of the plant would be for growth. So.
Okay, and Owen is asking what has contributed to the decrease in Europe?
They're not really sure if there's some sort of predator that they have there or just kind of reached its maximum and kind of died off. It's probably held in check by some European species that we don't know about. So I don't really want to introduce more invasive species into the country. You get into that Australia situation where you bring in something to control something else and bring in another invasive species. So it'd be interesting to know what they think is controlling it. But in North America, it just seems to be growing like crazy wherever and whatever water body it tends to get into.
Okay, Kaylee says hi. How does Starry stonewort use phosphorus differently than macrophytes?
Yeah, so aquatic plants, they have a root, so they're actually rooted into the sediment at the bottom of the lake. So they're actually pulling its phosphorus out from that sediment that's in the bottom of the lake. So it's in that lake mud or that lake sediment at the bottom. Starry stonewort doesn't have roots, so it just has these little things called rhizoids that kind of loosely attach it, and any big waves will kind of wash it off and spread it to a new area. But it collects the phosphorus from the surrounding water, so it's kind of absorbing it from the water rather than absorbing it from the sediment.
Okay, Aaron McGauley is asking, do you know if Trent-Severn Waterway is doing outreach given the spread through the system?
I haven't heard. I haven't heard what they're doing about it. I know there hasn't been a lot of people that have recognized Starry stonewort as kind of the invader, and we're just kind of starting this. The last year or two is really when a lot of this information has started coming out, where people started noticing it. And Trent-Severn Waterway, it seems to be anywhere you look, it seems to be the Starry stonewort seems to pop up.
And they're on the call, and we'll be speaking later, so they can speak to that. Julie Drain is asking, does anyone know why it became endangered in Japan and why they went back? Is there a use for it? So you've answered the first question already, I think, but the second question, is there a use for it?
Not that I know of. I think it's probably used as food for European ducks or something like that. May eat it kind of thing, the same as kind of our plants are here, but I haven't heard why it suddenly became endangered in Western Europe and also in Japan.
Any value to all that phosphorus out there tied up in it?
That's what we're looking at in Lake Simcoe. Lake Simcoe, we have the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, which is our current lake management plan. And to restore Lake Simcoe, we're looking at lowering phosphorus to 44 tons per year. And the last few years, we've been well above that just because of rainstorms and so on are delivering more phosphorus into the lake. But the phosphorus concentration inside the lake has continued to decrease since the 1980s. And we kind of want to figure out why there's this disconnection between loading and the concentration that's in the lake. And what we think is it might be part of the answer is a combination of quagga mussels, which kind of take a particulate phosphorus. So any phosphorus that's suspended in the water that's attached to particles, they kind of eat that or suck it out or they spread it across the bottom. And it could be we have so much Starry stonewort that it's actually keeping the phosphorus concentration in the lake in check. So any of the dissolved phosphorus that's in the water, it tends to be absorbed into Starry stonewort. So that's one thing we're looking at. And we're going to be researching that in years to come to see if maybe these two invasive species are kind of helping buffer any changes in Lake Simcoe.
Okay, and another part of Julie's question I missed is why do they want it back in Japan and Europe?
I don't know. I think it's probably restoring an invasive species or something like that. I've said if anybody knows somebody in Europe or Japan that wants some Starry stonewort, I'd be happy to FedEx boxes and boxes and crates of it to them if they want.
So. Peter Watson is asking, when removing by hand, would the use of a low micron mesh improve the containment of the bubbles?
It could, but a lot of them tend to fall off and kind of go to the sediment as well. So you're going to have to rake through that sediment. And again, you're going to need permits for this because you're not allowed to disturb the lake bottom or also rip out most of the plants. So you have to be really targeted in what you're doing, that you're only getting the invasive plant and you're not taking out any of the native plants as well.
Okay. And one